I left quietly after discovering my wife's affair 3.5 years into our marriage. A year later, after I'd cut off all contact, my ex-wife tracked me down. When I first learned about her infidelity, I moved up to the hills, trying to put distance between us and make sense of everything. I don't really know why I'm writing this now, maybe to help someone who's going through something similar since I've finally moved on. It was February 2018 when I found out about my wife's affair, 3.5 years into what I thought was a solid marriage. I had a contract job that sometimes required a lot of travel, but I could also work from home quite a bit. When I wasn't on the road, I worked as a director at a technical sales company, while my wife held a high-paying job herself. Things had grown tense over time, mostly because she was putting in more and more hours, and I was often traveling. Still, I'd have said we had a pretty good marriage overall. About 5 years ago, I met my wife, now my ex, at a cookout a mutual friend was hosting. We hit it off right away, connecting effortlessly as we talked. Honestly, I felt like I'd hit the jackpot with someone as beautiful and articulate as she was. Somehow, she liked my rough-around-edges personality, and we were head over heels before we knew it. We couldn't keep our hands off each other whenever we'd meet at each other's apartments. After dating for about 18 months, we tied the knot and moved into a spacious apartment, while saving up for a house. But after the first 3 years of marriage, things began to shift. Even though I still loved her, I started noticing how she'd pick fights over the smallest issues. Any time I brought up her late nights and frequent work events, she'd get defensive, saying it was just part of paying her dues as she moved up in her career. That was always her excuse. She also reminded me that since I was gone for weeks at a time, I had no right to complain. The truth was, my trips were usually just 3 or 4 days every 5 weeks, so I told her I could easily cut back on my travel if it would help. But these arguments never went anywhere, they just went around in circles. Looking back now, I realize I was clueless about my wife's affair. Other than our dwindling sex life and her constantly working late, I had no reason to be suspicious. I just figured her job was wearing her out. But getting turned down so often whenever I tried to initiate intimacy really did a number on my confidence. She had a work phone, which she could have been using to keep things secret, but I never saw any of the sneaky texting I'd heard about from other people's stories. She mostly spent her evenings in the spare bedroom, which she used as her home office. Around September 2017, Leah began coming home from work only to head right back out again for some work-related gathering. What started as one night a week quickly turned into 3 or more. I'm not the jealous type, but it did occur to me that others must be noticing, and she'd have to fend off some unwanted attention from the guys at her office. She worked mainly with male executives, but she always made it seem like she was laser-focused on her career. The first time I seriously suspected she was cheating was about a month before everything came crashing down. One evening, before heading home, she made a quick stop at the grocery store. She asked me to help bring the bags in, and as I was grabbing some stuff from the back seat, something pink caught my eye under the front passenger seat. It was a bra, her bra. I recognized it because she always bought them from the same store. Looking back, it was a glaring red flag. I knew her habit of taking her bra off first whenever she was feeling especially frisky, but seeing it there made my stomach turn. I couldn't understand why it was under her car seat. I didn't say a word. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. When I carried the bags into the kitchen, Leah asked me if I was feeling okay, saying I looked like I'd just seen a ghost. I brushed off her comment, fighting to keep my emotions in check. I didn't want to look upset or betrayed, even though I was falling apart inside. I decided right then and there that I needed to find out the truth about whether she was seeing someone else. I replayed every detail, wondering what other signs I'd missed. But apart from the bra, I didn't have any proof. We lived in a pretty big city, and she worked in an office building downtown. I tried to push the affair suspicion aside for a while, thinking maybe I just needed to put more effort into our relationship. I went all out one Friday, cooking a fancy dinner and setting the table with the best dishes, silverware, and candles. I even bought a beautiful bouquet and a nice bottle of wine. When she walked in after work, I pointed to the dinner I'd put together. But just like always, she breezed in, apologized, and said she had to head out to a local bar to meet up with her coworkers. She mentioned needing to shower first but said she could sit down for a quick bite before leaving. I must have gone completely silent because my stomach twisted in knots. I can't fully describe the anger that surged through me at that moment, but I'd reached my limit. While Leah was in the shower, I took my work phone and tossed it onto the back seat of her car. I'd been toying with the idea of using my personal phone to track her, and that seemed like the perfect way. After that, I walked back into the kitchen and threw away all the food and flowers I'd prepared. When she finished getting ready, she looked as gorgeous as ever. "All right, let's eat," she said. "Don't bother. Just go out with your friends," I told her. She shot me a puzzled look and asked if I was upset. "I'm just sad that you never want to spend time with me," I admitted. Her face tightened, and she made a snarky comment about me overreacting, saying I was acting childish. Under my breath I muttered, "Yeah, foolish me." I stood there, letting it all sink in. For once, I actually wanted us to spend the evening together. She just smirked and stormed off. Once she was gone, I pulled out my second phone and started tracking my work phone. She stopped about 20 minutes away at a bar she often visited with her coworkers. I decided to drive over and see for myself. Sure enough, her car was parked in the lot. I waited in my car across the street, feeling like some sort of stalker. It wasn't a good feeling, but I convinced myself that I had to know the truth. About an hour after I arrived, I saw her leave the bar with another man. He looked like one of those corporate types from her office, well-dressed, confident. He pulled her in close and kissed her right there in the parking lot. I went completely numb, my stomach tying itself in knots. They walked to another car and climbed in together. I followed them as they pulled out of the lot. Just as I suspected, they drove to a hotel about 10 minutes away. I parked on the street nearby and watched them walk in hand. I'd seen more than enough. I felt like an idiot. I started pounding the steering wheel with my fist. That was the breaking point. It was like something shut off inside me. I don't know if I'd blacked out or just dissociated, but when I came back to myself, I realized I needed a drink. I started driving aimlessly, replaying everything I had just witnessed. As much as I hate to admit it, I was crying, not out of sadness, but out of sheer rage. About 30 miles out of town, I came across this little tavern and pulled in. I sat at the bar and ordered a drink. The bartender, a woman, took one look at me and said I looked like I'd been hit by a freight train. I half smiled and replied, "Yeah, you could say that." A guy sat down next to me and started talking. I didn't feel like chatting, but something about him put me at ease. We got to talking, and eventually, I mentioned my wife's infidelity. I told him all I wanted was to get away from her and forget she ever existed. He clapped me on the back and said, "You're not alone, man. I went through the same thing a few years back. There's a reason things like this happen. You've got a choice now. You can either let this destroy you or use it as a turning point. It's all up to you from here." His words snapped me out of my misery, at least for a moment. Even though I was still hurting, I knew he was right. We introduced ourselves, and he told me his name was Ethan. I liked his down-to-earth vibe, even though he was more of a country guy. "So, when are you moving out?" he asked me. It hit me then, I hadn't thought that far ahead. All I knew was that I didn't want to be around Leah anymore. Ethan leaned in and said, "Look, I get what you're going through. If you need to get away, I've got an old mobile trailer on my property. It's nothing fancy and needs some work, but you're welcome to check it out. I'd give you a good deal on it, and you could park it on this beautiful piece of land I own. Honestly, I'd appreciate someone keeping an eye on the place for me. It might be just the escape you need." Just a thought. I let the idea sink in. The bartender, who had been listening in, chimed in. "Shoot, if I could have gotten away from my crazy ex-husband years ago, I would have lived anywhere just to clear my head." It felt like I had stumbled into some alternate reality, but the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like exactly what I needed. "I'll think about it and maybe come check it out," I told Ethan. We exchanged numbers and agreed to meet up at his place in a few days. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like I had some sort of plan, an escape route from what was quickly becoming a waking nightmare. One thing I was certain of: I never wanted to see Leah again. Cheating was something I always thought I could never forgive. When I got home that night, Leah was already there. She came out and asked, "Where were you?" I looked at her and replied, "Where do you think I was?" "I went out for drinks," she said casually. I looked her dead in the eye and asked, "Are you having an affair?" Her face fell for a second, but she recovered quickly, denying it. "Why would you even ask me that?" she said. I told her I'd heard rumors that she might be seeing someone at work. "Who told you that?" she demanded. "Just someone I know," I said, not giving her any details. She rolled her eyes and said, "You're being ridiculous," then accused me of being drunk and irrational. "I was out with friends," I told her, throwing her own words back at her. She looked like she wanted to argue more but just went to the bedroom instead. I knew she was lying. I knew she'd been unfaithful for months. I decided to sleep on the couch because I couldn't stand the thought of lying next to her. I didn't sleep at all, my mind replaying the image of her with that other guy. But then I thought about Ethan's trailer, and for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful. I didn't want to fight with her or demand a confession. I just wanted to get away. She had already destroyed everything we had built together, including our dreams of a future. There was no going back from this. She could live with the consequences of her actions. I owed her nothing. Now that I had undeniable proof that she'd been lying to me for months, I made up my mind to sleep on the couch. I couldn't get a wink of sleep, though. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was Leah tangled up in bed with that guy. I was overwhelmed by a mix of self-pity, disgust, and heartache. But then I remembered Ethan's offer about the trailer. Just the thought of it gave me a glimmer of hope, almost like a light bulb going off in my head. I couldn't help but wonder if there was something wrong with me because, in that moment of pain, I didn't want to fight or confront her. I just wanted to run. That weekend, we barely spoke and went about our routines like nothing was wrong. A few days later, I arranged to meet with Ethan. When I pulled up to his place, I was surprised to find that his ranch was beautiful, and the trailer was actually pretty decent, about 26 feet long and fully furnished. It reminded me of that spring break trip I took with my buddies back in college. Ethan took the money I offered him without a fuss, and honestly, I felt like I'd gotten a great deal. After that, he gave me directions to the property where the trailer would be set up. When I got there, I was blown away. There were hiking and biking trails nearby, and the land was covered in trees and brush, giving it a secluded, peaceful feel. Ethan even had a little cabin on a hill that overlooked the place, complete with electricity and water hookups for the trailer. The property was tucked away at the base of some mountains, and Ethan promised to haul the trailer up there and get it all set up for me. Over the next few weeks, I tried to get Leah to admit to what she'd done, but she just kept gaslighting me. I even warned her flat out that if I found out she was cheating, there'd be no going back. But she was so lost in her web of lies that she got defensive and lashed out at me, denying everything. It was almost laughable how bad her denials were. I kicked myself for not taking pictures of her with that guy because I didn't have any hard evidence to back up my accusations. After all the emotional turmoil, I made up my mind. I was done with this marriage. Instead of confronting her, I quietly started planning my exit. Whenever Leah was at work, I'd slowly move my stuff out of the apartment and into the trailer. It made me feel like I was finally taking control of something. During that time, Leah's behavior changed. She started being more polite, but I knew it was too little, too late. I needed space too, so I didn't mind when she continued her work outings after hours. One night, I made sure to get dressed up just as she was leaving. She gave me a curious look and asked where I was heading. I simply said, "Meeting up with some friends." She tried to ask more questions, but I cut her off with, "You wouldn't be interested, just a bunch of shop talk, and you don't know any of them." It was exactly the line she used on me whenever I asked to join her work events. "All right, have fun," she said, sounding a bit miffed. I just grinned and replied, "Oh, I will." I started building a new life, making friends while working on the trailer and hanging out with Ethan at the bar. His family and friends were great, and being around them helped me feel better. I also made the decision to cut back on my drinking. It would have been easy to drown my sorrows, but I knew that wouldn't solve anything. Leah told me she was heading out of town for a work trip the next week, saying that the executive team and some department heads were going. I asked who all was going and then, without thinking, added, "Hope you have fun with your boyfriend." The second it left my mouth, I regretted it because it sparked a huge argument. But like Ethan had said, it didn't really matter in the end. Looking back, I wish I'd known more about the guy she was seeing. But Ethan was right. Who he was didn't matter. The only thing that matters is that she chose to leave you. Ethan had told me. She's the one who destroyed the marriage, whether she admits it or not. That's a fact, plain and simple. I remember thinking that Ethan could probably write a book on betrayal. Damn. Leah's work trip was the perfect chance for me to leave for good. The day she left, I packed up everything that was mine, clothes, laptops, tools, all of it. I didn't take any shared furniture or household stuff. Before walking out, I wrote a note. At first, it was a long-winded explanation, but I ended up keeping it short. I hope it was worth it. I placed my wedding ring on top of the note on the kitchen table. As I walked out, I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. I was free. The pain would take time to heal, and I knew I'd have some emotional baggage to work through, but at least I was moving forward. I needed some time to figure things out on my own and to cut her out of my life quietly and quickly. I didn't feel any pride in the way I left. I didn't yell or demand answers. She didn't deserve that. In my eyes, she'd thrown away everything we had, our dreams of a home, a family, all of it. There was no going back. I didn't owe her a thing. She could face the consequences on her own. I hadn't made any long-term plans or called a lawyer. I just wanted a fresh start and some peace of mind. When I got to the trailer, the mountain air was exactly what I needed. I started running again the following week, and for the first time in a while, it felt good to be alive. While Leah was away, she sent me a few casual texts like, "We just landed," and "Team dinner tonight," along with some that were a little more probing, like, "Where are you?" and "Why haven't you answered me?" I ignored all of them. When she got back from her trip, my phone blew up with calls and texts. She kept trying to get a hold of me, but I didn't respond. Her mom even tried calling, but I didn't answer her either. My dad was the only family I had left, and we weren't close, so she didn't try to get to me through him. After a week of being ignored, her messages became more frantic. One text said, "What is this? We need to talk. Whatever you think you know, nothing's going on. There is no affair." Then, a week later, she finally texted, "I'm sorry. Things got out of hand. It didn't mean anything, I was just distracted with work, and you were gone a lot. I made a mistake. I was going to end it. It was just a mistake." I'd been waiting for her to confess, but hearing it didn't bring any closure. If anything, it made me hate her even more. Why couldn't she just be honest? I realized then that I couldn't imagine a future with her. A mistake doesn't last 6 months, 8 months, or a year. Her attempts to get me to come back grew more pathetic, but I never responded. I didn't want her knowing where I was or invading my new life. I didn't want her to ruin my peace. After a while, I changed my phone number. Then, in June 2018, I got an email saying she'd hired a lawyer and was filing for divorce. My only reply was, "Okay, sounds good." With that, I was free. A few months later, after moving out of the apartment, I never saw her again.